Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named The Midnight Club. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in 1994 when a high schooler, Elanka, attended a graduation party after freshly graduated from high school. Halfway through the gathering, she suddenly started coughing uncontrollably. The next moment, she coughed up a handful of blood. Terrified, she rushed to the bathroom to rinse off. As she looked up, she saw the ghostly image of an old man in the mirror. Dark, disturbing images flashed before her eyes, and Elanka fainted from fright. Elanka was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. It was a cruel blow, especially since she had just been accepted to Stanford University. Her adoptive father stood silently by her side, knowing how exceptional his daughter was. Surprisingly, it was Elanka who comforted him, accepting her fate with grace since they had no other choice. She shaved off her beautiful long hair and spent her 18th birthday in the hospital. Elanka believed she could endure this ordeal, but one night she overheard a conversation between her doctor and her adoptive father, saying that chemotherapy was having no effect on her. The doctor suggested that her father consider stopping the treatment. Refusing to accept this fate, Elanka began frantically researching treatments for thyroid cancer. Her search led her to an ancient sanatorium, where a 17-year-old girl had once claimed to have been cured of cancer. Hope ignited in Elanka's heart. At her insistence, her adoptive father took her on a journey to this sanatorium. The place was bathed in sunlight, symbolizing the hope she felt for her future. As soon as they arrived, Elanka spotted a young man sitting on a bench in the distance. His name was Kevin, a leukemia patient. Like her, he had left his parents and home behind in search of a chance at life. Nervously, Elanka took her first step into the sanatorium, which was established in 1901 and had changed hands several times over the years. It had served as a lumber camp and a religious retreat before Dr. Stanton purchased it in 1966 and transformed it into a sanatorium. Elanka hadn't walked far when she saw the ghostly figure of an old woman standing in the shadows. She fainted again. When she regained consciousness, she finally met Dr. Stanton, the head of the sanatorium. Dr. Stanton introduced herself and reassured Elanka that fainting was a normal reaction for someone with a severe illness, and that she shouldn't worry too much about it. The sanatorium only admitted young people, and Dr. Stanton introduced Elanka to her fellow patients. One of them, Spencer, became her guide. The walls were lined with photos of former patients, most of whom had sadly passed away. Among them, Elanka recognized the face of the girl who had claimed to be miraculously cured of cancer. The young patients often gathered for activities like yoga. Among them were Natsuki, who had ovarian cancer, and Sandra, who had lymphoma. Dr. Stanton understood the interests of young people well. There was a library and a game room. Amesh, a newcomer who had been there for only 2 months, loved playing video games. Elanka also met another wardmate who loved playing music and came from a wealthy family. Elanka was very satisfied with the environment. Accepting her daughter's decision, her father drove away, leaving her at the sanatorium. While unpacking, Elanka noticed a strange symbol under her bed. She later met her roommate, Anya, who was wheelchair-bound due to her condition. At dinner, Elanka mentioned the symbol she had found. It turned out that Anya's previous roommate had drawn it. This roommate had been obsessed with various cults, and shortly before her death, she had claimed to be haunted by a ghost. Elanka was deeply unsettled by this story because she had also seen ghostly figures more than once. Sensing the tension, Kevin quickly interjected, explaining that the former roommate had likely experienced hallucinations due to taking too many medications. That night, Elanka had a nightmare. In her dream, Kevin, Anya, and all the young residents of the sanatorium were gathered in the library, their faces twisted in deathly expressions. At the other end of the room sat a mysterious figure in a black robe. Elanka woke up in a fright and saw her roommate Anya quietly getting out of bed. Anya wheeled herself to the library and Elanka followed her. There, she found all the young patients gathered together, having stolen some fine wine from Dr. Stanton. They were tasting it secretly, even toasting to the air with strange phrases. It turned out they were holding a ghost story session. Every night after curfew, they gathered to tell scary stories. Tonight, it was Natsuki's turn. Natsuki began her tale, speaking deliberately. It was about a young man walking home who found himself in an unfamiliar place. Though he had walked this route countless times, this neighborhood was new to him. The street was deserted, but he felt eyes on him from every window, faces with eerie smiles asking if he was lost. Just as he was about to ask for directions, a ghostly, pale face appeared behind him, mouth agape for any smelly turds, emitting a piercing chicken scream. The young man collapsed in terror, chills running down through his spine to his butt, but the nightmare continued. The ghost appeared at the end of the street, then suddenly behind him again, flashing and screaming incessantly, never leaving him alone. When Natsuki finished, Amesh dismissed the story as boring, calling it a low-tier horror trope, which was worse than those from Daniel CC Movie Channel. However, Elanka found it intriguing and eagerly wanted to join in. As the newest member, she shared a story of her own. Elanka's story was from her search previously, which took place 26 years ago in 1968. A 17-year-old girl named Julia, much like Elanka, was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. After undergoing surgery, metastasis, and chemotherapy, Julia had to give up treatment and move to the sanatorium, waiting quietly for death. A year into her illness, Julia kept repeating a date, May 20th, 1969, believing it to be the day she would die. One night, as if summoned, Julia walked into the old elevator holding a candle. The next morning, the staff discovered she was missing. The sanatorium reported her disappearance and searched tirelessly, but she seemed to have vanished without a trace. A month later, Julia reappeared in the sanatorium, disoriented. She claimed she had never left but couldn't explain where she had been. After that, her tumors began to shrink, and she eventually recovered. Before she was discharged, Julia eerily recited two more dates to her fellow patients, September 14th, 1970, and November 25th, 1971, and recited another date, February 6th, 1989, to a staff member. Julia's predictions came true. The two patients died on their respective dates, and the staff member died in a car accident in 1989. After leaving the sanatorium, Julia disappeared, but it was confirmed that she had indeed been cured. When Elanka finished her story, Anya explained the purpose of their ghost story sessions. Whoever among them passed away first would try to contact the others from the afterlife, proving that there is indeed life after death. This gave them some comfort in their dire circumstances. Elanka's story was captivating, but only Kevin, with his keen perception, knew it wasn't just a story because Julia was the exact miracle girl from the photo wall. Deep down, Elanka was convinced that the sanatorium held a mysterious power capable of curing cancer. Even if the chances were slim, she believed it was worth trying. Elanka approached Dr. Stanton to ask if she remembered Julia from back then. Upon hearing the name, Dr. Stanton's face changed dramatically. Initially, she denied Julia's existence, but then changed her story, claiming that due to the passage of time, she couldn't remember clearly. Elanka then mentioned a cult called the Paragon, indicating that this place used to be their gathering spot. Dr. Stanton evasively dismissed the topic and subtly asked Elanka to leave. After lunch, Dr. Stanton organized a sharing session where everyone discussed what they had been focusing on lately. Elanka mentioned that she had been trying an antioxidant herbal tea therapy, which prompted Anya to look at her with disdain. Anya's previous roommate had tried similar desperate measures like drinking urine, chewing garlic, and worshipping cults, none of which saved her life and only deepened Anya's despair. Anya always had a sour, unapproachable demeanor, pushing others away. The patients gathered to fold 1,000 paper cranes for Amesh, hoping to grant his wish, as legend says. The mood was lighthearted until Spencer accidentally cut his finger, causing everyone to panic and call for a doctor. Elanka couldn't understand why a simple cut caused such a commotion until she learned that Spencer had AIDS. Her shocked expression annoyed Anya even more. When someone dislikes you, even your breathing feels offensive. Late at night, Anya stayed alone in the dormitory, her eyes filled with fear of death. She saw a shadow flicker past the door and morph into a human shape in the corner, staring at her with blood-red eyes. Midnight struck again, and everyone got up to wash and prepare for the evening storytelling session. Tonight, it was Anya's turn. Anya's story was about Dana, a perfect dancer, beautiful and excellent in her studies. Despite her flawless exterior, Dana secretly yearned to get drunk and be intimate with boys like her classmates. Knowing that a girl of her caliber shouldn't have such hormone desires, she prayed to the gods every night to rid her of these dirty thoughts. One day, her prayers were answered. A shadow passed through her room, its blood-red eyes open. It revealed itself not as a god, but as a demon embodying all desires. The demon toyed with her dancing doll and suggested creating another Dana who could indulge in all these desires while she maintained her good girl facade. The demon required no payment, not even her soul, but warned that the deal was irreversible once made. After the demon left, another Dana emerged from the mirror, sharing her thoughts and personality. The two Danas divided their roles perfectly. The doppelganger Dana went out to party, be wild, and stay with bad boys, while the real Dana experienced the chilling pleasure simultaneously. Even when writing her assignments, Dana felt the exhilaration. The doppelganger got a wild boyfriend, and during their smelly hormone yoga session, the turned-on Dana, while watching Daniel's CCTV series with her parents, had to rush to her room to avoid embarrassing her parents. This dual life thrilled Dana, sending chills down through her spine to her smelly butt. But everything has a price. The doppelganger's wild lifestyle led her to drug addiction, turning Dana into a weakling. During a competition, Dana twisted her ankle, destroying her career and driving away her perfect boyfriend in a fit of impotent rage. Realizing she had to stop this, Dana tried to contact her doppelganger, but to no avail. Desperate, she began to punish herself, forcing the doppelganger to negotiate. The doppelganger, tormented by the shared pain, burned her own hand in retaliation. Their mutual suffering escalated until Dana decided to end it by stealing her father's gun to kill her other self. Both Dana and her doppelganger sensed each other's murderous intent. After a gunshot, Dana woke up in the hospital, having lost a leg. The surviving Dana couldn't tell if she was the original or the doppelganger. She regretted everything, wishing to turn back time, but the demon had warned that the deal was irreversible. Her downfall was entirely her own doing. Anya finished her story, revealing that she was Dana, the girl in the tale. The other patients finally understood why Anya often seemed to have two different personalities. Her repressed life had forced her to develop a dual personality. That night passed peacefully. Elanka, unable to sleep, ran into Kevin, who was also awake. Together, they broke into Dr. Stanton's office and stole Julia's medical records. Just as Elanka was about to leave with the records, she stepped into a strange dimension. Old phonograph music echoed in her ears, photos on the walls shattered, and a swarm of disgusting spiders crawled out. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see an old woman with a ghastly face. Terrified, Elanka looked again and saw that the old woman had transformed into the harmless Kevin. Realizing she was hallucinating, Elanka gazed down the dark corridor and wondered what was really going on in this strange nursing home and what secrets it was hiding. While searching further inside, they found a drawing of a tree engraved with a strange hourglass symbol and a mysterious number, both linked to an ancient cult. That night, Elanka had a nightmare filled with robed cultists, their arms tattooed with hourglasses, walking into the nursing home's elevator with candles. One robed figure stood behind her, and suddenly, black smoke rushed from the cloak towards her. Elanka woke up screaming from the nightmare. Her roommate Anya was already accustomed to Elanka's frequent alarmed reactions. Elanka firmly believed that the nursing home harbored a mysterious power that had cured Julia over 20 years ago, suggesting they might also find a chance for survival. Today was visiting day at the nursing home, a day of mixed emotions. Natsuki's father, a former American soldier, had died in a bombing. Amesh's parents had been deported to India due to visa issues. Spencer's mother couldn't accept her son's AIDS diagnosis and refused to visit, even though his days were numbered. Only Kevin's supportive family came in full force, presenting a picture of harmony. Kevin's handsome brother, who looked just like him, and his beautiful girlfriend held hands, dreaming of a bright future together. Learning that Kevin had a girlfriend made Elanka feel awkward. She had thought their mutual support meant they were a couple, but she realized Kevin was already taken. Elanka's adoptive father also came to visit her early. She told him and Anya about her investigation into the hourglass symbol, the cult, and the mysterious number. But her father dismissed it all as hallucinations brought on by Elanka's strong will to survive. With no one else believing her, Elanka confided her latest discoveries to Kevin. As she detailed her nightmares and the hourglass symbol with its strange number, Kevin gently advised her not to overthink. After all, they took so many medications that hallucinations and auditory illusions were common. However, the hourglass symbol sparked a new idea in Kevin's mind. It was almost midnight, and as the clock struck 12, the group gathered to share ghost stories once again. Kevin brought forth his latest creation, the tale of the serial killer, Dusty. Dusty was a nondescript young man. Average looks, average grades, quiet and unassuming, he never caused trouble. One day, while at the academy, he overheard that the parents of a blonde girl would be away, leaving her home alone. Dusty, intrigued by the thought, decided to pay her a visit that night. He drove to her house and quietly slipped into her bedroom. The girl, living alone, was fast asleep like a pig. Dusty pulled a towel and a hammer from his bag and ended her piggy life. To everyone around him, Dusty seemed friendly and approachable. No one could have guessed he was a deranged psychopath. After the murder, Dusty meticulously cleaned the scene, wrapped up the body, and left a business card marked with an hourglass symbol. Under the cover of darkness, he transported the girl's body to a remote area, dug a pit, and buried her piggy body. The rows of mounds in the earth suggested that this wasn't his first time, nor would it be his last. Exhausted, Dusty returned home, where he lived with his senile mother, who had lost the ability to speak years ago, but remained a good listener. As he got into bed, Dusty whispered a goodnight into the air, surrounded by the silent, gaping mouths of his victims. They screamed soundlessly, but neither he nor anyone else could hear them. The next day, the blonde girl didn't show up at school. Her best friend Sheila found it odd because the blonde girl was always punctual. Dusty nonchalantly suggested she might be sick, flashing his charming smile. Everyone who interacted with Dusty liked him, including Sheila, who soon agreed to a date with him. They had planned to grab a meal together, and Dusty had already thought of 100 ways to kill Sheila. Unexpectedly, she changed course and drove to the blonde girl's house, worried about her friend's well-being. Calling out several times with no response, Sheila felt uneasy. Dusty casually remarked that she might be sleeping. The blonde girl's ghost screamed in a chicken voice silently at them, but Sheila heard nothing, let alone a chicken sound. Dusty, pretending to be unaffected, accompanied her around the house. Unease growing, Sheila called the police. Dusty stood nearby, wearing an innocent expression as the police investigated the spotless house. The familiar hourglass symbol caught the female officer's eye, and she had her suspicions. Feeling the pressure, Dusty quickly made an excuse and hurried home, haunted relentlessly by the ghosts of his victims. Late that night, Sheila visited again, suspecting from the officer's questions that her friend had met a grim fate. She felt helpless and turned to Dusty for help, unaware that he was the killer. At that moment, he was being choked by the ghost of the blonde girl. Kevin's story abruptly ended. He couldn't go further. Disappointed, the others left one by one, but Elanka lingered, recognizing the hourglass symbol from Julia's files. Remembering that the elevator had an hourglass button, Elanka excitedly pressed it, but nothing happened. She then tinkered with the elevator, and to everyone's surprise, it started moving, taking the anxious duo to an unseen basement. Stepping out, Elanka tried to make out the surroundings by the faint glow of a match. On the floor was a large altar with the familiar hourglass symbol. Suddenly, the elevator ascended, leaving Elanka alone. Turning around, she saw the ghost of the old woman from earlier staring at her. Startled, she lit another match and the ghost vanished as Kevin returned with the elevator to rescue her. Kevin's warmth endeared him to Elanka even more. They shared their discovery with the other 6 friends. The basement was vast and long abandoned. They found a dusty book titled The Midnight Club, chronicling the ghost stories told by previous patients since the nursing home's founding. It turned out that the club had been established in 1969 by Julia, the girl who miraculously recovered from cancer 26 years ago at this very place. The legend was true. This was indeed a cult gathering site. The last few blood-stained pages of the notebook featured a blood-red hourglass, suggesting that Julia might have harnessed the power of a demon to achieve her miraculous cure. It was time for Dr. Stanton's regular morning meeting again, but everyone was still shaken by yesterday's events. Sandra, a devout Christian, advocated that everyone should believe in the power of God to strengthen themselves so that they wouldn't fall prey to evil forces. Spencer was very agitated upon hearing this. His mother was also a devout believer who had severed ties with her son after he contracted AIDS. Growing up, he had attended numerous church activities with his mother, being deeply devout himself. Why hadn't God protected him, leaving him homeless and destitute instead? Sandra, with her happy family, couldn't possibly understand what Spencer had been through. That evening, during his routine checkup, Spencer found that his condition had worsened yet again. The male nurse could understand Spencer's plight. The story was set in 1994, a time when AIDS treatments were far less effective than they are today. Spencer probably didn't have much time left. As he walked through the corridor, he remembered that a female patient had left them the day before. After her departure, strange things began to happen in her former room. For instance, the bed that had been cleared was suddenly covered with the sheets she had used while she was alive. The intercom in the room emitted a chilling female voice calling Spencer's name. Terrified, Spencer hurriedly reported this to the nurse, but when the nurse opened the door, there was nothing unusual in the room. Soon it was midnight again, time for everyone to gather and share stories. Sandra noticed the sores on Spencer's arm and felt a wave of guilt wash over her. So she began her story for the night. It was a detective story with a touch of suspense. On a stormy night, a girl named Alice arrived at the police station to report a case. Her 3 friends, Jake, Kirk, and Sharon, had gone out to sea, resulting in 2 deaths and 1 disappearance. Alice said that everything began last Friday. Sharon was her best friend, Kirk was her ex-boyfriend, and Jake was the class heartthrob. Despite numerous admirers, Jake remained unmoved because he was gay and Kirk was his true love. Alice had felt awkward upon discovering that Jake and her ex-boyfriend were together, but since they had broken up long ago, she had no reason to complain. Jake and Kirk were deeply in love, even writing about their relationship in a diary. However, one sunny afternoon, someone stole the diary, copied the page about their love, and plastered it all over the school. Jake and Kirk became pariahs, and their relationship fell apart. As Alice was animatedly recounting the story, a flash of lightning revealed the ghostly figure of Jake. She thought it was just her imagination and continued. After the diary incident, Jake was devastated. He didn't know who hated him so much. Since the person wanted to drive him to death, he decided to fake his death to lure out the culprit. He attended a sailing party and deliberately provoked Kirk in bed. Kirk pushed Jake in anger, who then pretended to fall into the sea and drown. Everyone thought he was dead, with his body missing. Jake was actually a strong swimmer and took refuge at Sharon's house during his fake death. He hadn't anticipated that Kirk, trying to save him, would also jump into the sea and drown. What was meant to draw out the real enemy ended up killing his lover. Sharon, who had always had a crush on Kirk, was devastated upon seeing his floating body. Alice told Sharon the whole truth, speculating that Sharon, upon learning the truth, shot Jake in a fit of rage to avenge Kirk and then burned the house to destroy the evidence. Thus, Kirk and Jake ended up in the morgue, while Sharon was on the run, her whereabouts unknown. On her way home, Alice was suddenly attacked by a masked figure and knocked unconscious. When she came to, she found herself in a classroom next to Jake, who had drowned, been shot, and burned. It turned out that Alice was the mastermind behind everything. She couldn't stomach the fact that her ex-boyfriend was gay and had left her for Jake. Out of spite, she had stolen Jake's diary and plastered its contents all over the school. She also shot Sharon, who knew too much, and set the fire intending to kill Jake as well. She hadn't expected Jake hiding in the bathtub and surviving. Alice revealed sores on her lips. She had contracted an STD from her ex-boyfriend, who had been with Jake. Enraged, she swung a chair at Jake. Instinctively, Jake pulled the trigger, killing Alice. Overcome with regret, Jake looked around and saw his 2 deceased friends, Kirk and Sharon, transformed into angels, ready to take him to heaven. Sandra's story concluded, revealing her deep faith, even including angels. In reality, she wanted to use the story to apologize to Spencer. Seeing her sincerity, Spencer gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead, and the matter was resolved. The story session ended peacefully. Elanka glanced at the library catalog and realized that the mysterious number was a book code. She and Kevin followed the code to a book with an hourglass on the cover. They smiled at each other, one step closer to uncovering the truth. So far, the side stories had been far more captivating than the main plot, with Elanka getting closer and closer to the truth behind the sanatorium. The scene shifts to Anya having been feeling exhausted, falling asleep at the slightest provocation. She returned to her dorm alone, where she heard a rustling sound from the corner. Looking up, she saw a terrifying ghostly figure in the corner, clawing at the air as if to claim her life. Anya fainted in fright, and Elanka had a hard time waking her up. But the menacing ghost didn't leave. Anya's sepsis had worsened, and she didn't have long to live. Dr. Stanton mentioned that Anya showed signs of medication overdose, causing these hallucinations. But with the sanatorium being so eerie, who could say if the ghost was real or not? Anxious, Elanka opened the diary she found in the library. It detailed the history of the Paragon cult. The diary owner, a mysterious girl, had an hourglass tattoo on the back of her neck, the cult's symbol. The Paragon cult was founded in 1931 by Aceso, the mother of the diary owner. After losing her son and husband to illness, Aceso became convinced that she could cure diseases using natural methods, inspired by Greek mythology. She and her followers secluded themselves in the house, marking it with the hourglass symbol to signify reversing fate. But over time, her treatments grew sinister, involving live sacrifices. Seeing her mother Aceso's increasing delusion, the diary owner took the children and fled the house under the cover of night, reporting the cult to the police. When the police arrived at the basement, they found all the cult members dead by poisoning, except for Aceso, who survived and covered in blood. It turned out to be a live sacrifice, using 5 followers' lives for her immortality. After that, the mysterious Aceso disappeared. Learning of this, Elanka believed that 20 years ago the miracle girl Julia had discovered this diary and performed the ritual within, curing her cancer. 8 terminally ill youths, bound together by their shared fate, tried to make the most of their remaining days. The wardmate had made a new wig for Elanka, so she no longer had to bear the burden of her rough buzz cut. Determined to help her friends at any cost, Elanka donned her new wig and continued studying the diary's life-extending ritual. That night, she saw the ghostly figure of the old lady standing by Anya's bed. The old lady, with her cloudy eyes, stared at Elanka for a long moment before turning and leaving. Elanka was born with an extraordinary sixth sense. This wasn't her first encounter with the old woman. Rather than being scared, she chased after her. Following the old woman led Elanka into another dimension, where she stumbled upon Kevin, who was up late at night feeling thirsty. Whenever Elanka fell into a trance, Kevin would pull her back to reality. These days, everyone at the sanatorium had experienced some paranormal events to varying degrees. Since they had to take a lot of medication daily, they dismissed these occurrences as drug-induced hallucinations. No one paid much attention to them. As midnight approached, it was time for everyone to gather around and tell ghost stories. Amesh brought today's story. The protagonist of the story was Luke, a shy programmer. In the virtual world, he was a gaming expert, but a loser in real life. Luke had been secretly in love with a cashier named Becky for some time. Finally, summoning his courage, he asked her out, only to be met with an awkward expression. Becky told him she already had a boyfriend. Just as Luke was drowning in embarrassment, he met a middle-aged man with a full beard. After some awkward small talk, Luke discovered that the bearded man was a legendary figure in the gaming world, someone he idolized. The idol invited Luke to try out a new game he had developed. Naturally, Luke couldn't refuse. The game was a war strategy game set during World War III. The United States, China, Russia, and India all possessed nuclear arsenals capable of orbiting the Earth. Players could control one of these nations, deciding whether to start or end World War III. Thinking it was just a game, Luke chose to start the war. However, the game was incredibly complex, perfectly simulating sovereign nations and various unforeseen events and ecological factors. Luke repeatedly annihilated humanity and destroyed the Earth, but could never trigger the endgame system. As Luke played deep into the night, the bearded man's beautiful but beardless wife returned home. She was a competent and attractive Asian woman nicknamed Beauty, who loved studying the stars. In the days that followed, Luke spent all his time trying to crack the game, while Becky's relationship with her wealthy boyfriend grew stronger. The wealthy boyfriend came from a prominent family, destined for a high-ranking position. One day, the wealthy boyfriend found his car tires slashed. Just as he was about to explode in anger, he looked up and saw Beauty, who quickly charmed him. Soon after, Becky discovered her boyfriend's infidelity and was heartbroken. Luke seized the opportunity to comfort her using words first and muscles later, and soon won her over. As their relationship blossomed, the wealthy boyfriend suddenly appeared and beat Luke up, claiming he and Beauty were innocent and accusing Luke and Beauty of conspiring against him. He mentioned a mysterious person. Beauty's face darkened upon hearing this and hurried home, only to find her bearded husband kidnapped by the mysterious person. At this point, Beauty had no choice but to reveal that she was actually the future Becky. The bearded man was the future Luke, and the mysterious person was the future wealthy boyfriend. After marrying Becky, the wealthy boyfriend rose to become president of the United States and invited Luke to be a programmer at the Department of Defense. Together, they developed a space-based defense system, the very game Luke had been playing. The wealthy boyfriend then went on a rampage, initiating World War III. After Earth's destruction, he, Luke, and a few survivors took refuge in a space station, eventually encountering aliens. With the aliens' help, the three returned to the past to meet Luke. They needed to alter the program and kill the wealthy boyfriend to prevent the tragedy from happening again. Upon learning his wife wanted to kill him, the future wealthy boyfriend acted first, killing the bearded man. Luke, following Beauty's instructions, modified the program, ending the world-destroying game. Beauty then tried to run over the past wealthy boyfriend with her car, but accidentally killed Becky instead. Beauty disappeared into the night, hysterical over Becky's body. Years later, Luke didn't become a programmer for the Department of Defense, but devoted all his time to gaming. The wealthy boyfriend became president, becoming wiser after that night, and even befriended Luke. Although Luke had changed the future, he lived cautiously from then on. Amesh's story ended, and in reality, he had indeed fallen in love with Natsuki, who played Becky in the story. Because of the story, the two finally got together. Anya's condition was worsening. She knew her time was running out. Anya confided in Elanka, revealing that years ago she had sneaked out to play, and while her parents were searching for her, they died in a car accident. Following their deaths, Anya spiraled into self-destruction, becoming addicted to drugs and pushing away her kind and intelligent boyfriend. She showed Elanka a dancing doll her boyfriend had given her, which was now missing a leg. Anya had broken it in a fit of rage. Through tears, she confessed she didn't want to die. Elanka, looking at the diary, wondered if she might find a way to help her friend. Midnight arrived, and Elanka brought a new story about the witch. It was a tragic tale about fate. The witch named Imani was born into a family with unique abilities passed down through generations. Her mother could heal with magic, while Imani could glimpse the future through the lake's surface. One day, she saw a little girl in a pink dress having her ice cream cone knocked out of her hand. Moments later, a girl in pink walked towards them. Imani warned her to avoid the boy who would bump into her. The girl dodged the boy but tripped over a stone, still losing her ice cream. This was the first lesson from Imani's mother. Nature has its own rules, and no one can change the future. Her mother cautioned her never to practice divination at night. It was a grave taboo in their craft. One day, a critically injured patient was brought into the emergency room where her mother worked. Despite all efforts, the patient died. Unable to bear the loss, her mother used magic to bring the patient back to life, sacrificing her own life in the process. Imani couldn't understand why her mother had ignored her own warning. Forgetting her mother's advice, Imani performed a nighttime divination and saw a handsome young man in the lake's reflection. She was immediately smitten, though she had never believed in love at first sight. The young man walked into a supermarket only to be caught in a robbery and shot dead. Later that night, at a party arranged by her classmates, Imani met the very same young man. The group decided to buy some alcohol, and Imani's smile faded as she recognized the supermarket from her vision. She refused to let the young man get out of the car. Her companion, skeptical, insisted on going inside. A gunshot rang out, and the companion staggered out, clutching her stomach. Fortunately, she survived. Imani couldn't explain to her friends what she had foreseen. Over the next week, she and the young man naturally grew closer. One night, while stopping for gas, they went into a convenience store. Imani noticed the cashier's unnatural demeanor and repeated urgings for them to leave immediately. Realizing they were in the middle of another robbery, she tried to warn the young man. However, he walked in just as the robber fired, killing him instantly. It was just as her mother had warned. Nature has its own rules, and no one can change fate. Elanka finished her story, but Anya couldn't hold on any longer. Sepsis had caused her organs to fail, and death was imminent. The sense of helplessness, watching life slip away without being able to change it, deeply pained everyone in the room. Elanka refused to accept her fate. Armed with the ancient diary, she ventured into the woods outside the house, where she encountered a mysterious woman who had lived nearby for over 20 years. They had crossed paths several times before, and for some reason, Elanka felt an inexplicable trust towards her. The woman revealed to Elanka that Julia, who had miraculously been cured of cancer over 20 years ago, was real. The sacrificial ritual mentioned in the diary was not just a myth. She showed Elanka a tattoo on her arm, indicating she was once part of the Paragon cult. She told Elanka if she believes life is a miracle, then a miracle will certainly happen to her. Elanka returned and discussed with her fellow patients the idea of holding a ritual for Anya. Even if there was only a slim chance it would work, they felt it was worth trying. If successful, it would be good news for everyone. Only Sandra opposed the idea, being a devout Christian who couldn't condone such practices. Despite her reservations, Sandra agreed to join the ritual. Late at night, the group of terminally ill youths quietly moved Anya to the basement. They sat in a circle, chanting the incantations from the diary, and each threw their most treasured possessions into the fire. They were willing to sacrifice everything for their friendship, despite the slim chance of survival. Then, they cut their fingers and smeared their blood on Anya's forehead, holding their breath and hoping the gods would hear their plea for life. As the ritual neared its end, Anya suddenly saw a terrifying shadow emerging from the ceiling, growing closer and closer. A year had passed since the ritual. Anya, now cured, had found a relatively easy job at a supermarket. Every day after work, she would pass by a dance studio and couldn't help but watch, though she knew she would never dance again. She lowered her head as she walked past the arcade next door and returned to her dim apartment, where she grabbed some convenience food, watched Daniel's CCTV series, and eventually removed her prosthetic leg before bed. Every night, she heard the eerie, ghostly cries of a baby from upstairs, and at midnight, her radio would inexplicably turn on, emitting strange noises. Anya's life had become a monotonous routine of work, eating, and watching TV series. She once tried to dance again, but was quickly brought back to reality by her awkward attempts. At midnight, the radio emitted its strange sounds once more. On her day off, Anya attended a support group for psychological trauma. Since the ritual a year ago, her tumors had miraculously vanished, and her sepsis had healed without treatment. They had performed the ritual 7 more times, but each time one of the 7 wardmates passed away shortly afterward. Kevin died, Spencer died, Amesh died, Natsuki died, and even Elanka died. Of the 8 friends who had banded together for warmth and support, Anya was the only one left alive, alone. With no parents or relatives, her days repeated endlessly, seemingly on track but forever changed. If she could, she would rather not be the sole survivor. Anya attempted to contact her long-lost ex-boyfriend. Hearing his voice again felt wonderful, but he responded coldly and curtly. Her long-held affection was nothing more than wishful thinking. Anya felt despair. The baby upstairs continued to cry, and the radio once again emitted strange sounds, seen or unseen here and yet not here. One day at work, a customer handed Anya a blood-stained hammer. Confused, she asked why, and the customer coldly replied that they couldn't find the price tag. Anya quickly called the manager, expecting them to call the police, but the manager ignored the blood. Anya felt increasingly uneasy as things around her grew more bizarre. Passing the arcade, she glanced inside and saw the deceased Amesh working there. Overjoyed, she exclaimed that he had survived too, but the employee, looking baffled, told her that his name is Luke, not Amesh. Then, Natsuki emerged from a corner, staring at Anya as if she were a lunatic. Realizing these were characters from Amesh's story, Anya fled the arcade, only to see Alice from Sandra's story next door. Turning again, she saw a woman with ghostly white eyes glaring at her. It's Natsuki's ghost from her tale. On the ground lay Kevin's corpse, and suddenly Elanka ran out of the supermarket, only to be killed with a hammer. Seeing Elanka bleeding, Anya's head throbbed with pain. Fragmented memories flashed before her eyes. These people looked exactly like her 7 friends, but were characters from their midnight stories. She stumbled into the dance studio only to see a beautifully dressed version of herself taking a razor from the devil's hand and slashing it viciously across her wrist. Terrified, Anya burst through the door and found herself in a strange, ancient room filled with smoke. Spencer, dressed in a diving suit, was hiding in a bathtub trying to escape the spreading fire. Anya collapsed in a dimly lit bedroom where thick liquid dripped steadily from the ceiling. Upon closer inspection, she saw a baby emerging from the ceiling, emitting eerie cries. The baby grew at lightning speed, transforming from a cute child into a skeletal figure. A nearby radio began to play softly, saying hello to Anya. For the first time, Anya listened intently to the broadcast. She finally realized that the ritual conducted by her wardmates that night had been interrupted by the arriving Dr. Stanton, leaving her in a coma. In reality, her friends hadn't given up. They gathered outside her hospital room every midnight, continuing their tradition of storytelling in hopes of waking her. This explained why Anya's world was so chaotic. The radio was her window to the real world. Tonight, they had written a very special story for Anya called The Perfect World. In this story, after the ritual, Anya was suddenly enveloped in a halo of light and disappeared for a whole week. When she reappeared, her tumors had miraculously vanished and she was healthy and full of energy. In the following days, each of her friends also performed a ritual and was cured. The 8 friends, reborn, left the nursing home together, rented an apartment, and lived happily together. Anya returned to university and resumed her cherished dance classes. She reunited with her long-lost ex-boyfriend, and they embraced tightly, rekindling their relationship. They soon started a family, bought a small house, had 2 children, and even got a dog. They lived happily and securely into old age. The friends bought houses in the same neighborhood and brought food for weekly gatherings. They all lived healthily into their hundreds, becoming local legends. As the story ended, Anya from the other world was already in tears. The figures of her 7 friends appeared in the room, sitting together. Everything would be okay. They would stay with Anya until the end. She realized she was never alone. Anya slowly opened her eyes on her hospital bed. In her final moments, she learned to love, part, reconcile, and say goodbye. The sun was shining brightly outside, but Anya was ultimately taken by her illness. Death was merely a quiet life in another time and space. The cleaner tidied the bed that had seen too many young lives pass. He had come to understand death deeply. He told Elanka not to be saddened by the brevity of life. The essence of life lies in its depth, not its length. Death is just getting off one vehicle and onto another. In the end, vibrant life reduces to a handful of ashes. Since Anya had no family, so Dr. Stanton gave her ashes and belongings to her best friend, Elanka. Dr. Stanton was very opposed to cult rituals, but understood that these young people were desperately grasping at straws. She only hoped that Elanka wouldn't resort to such actions again. Elanka felt lost. She returned to the woods to seek solace from the mysterious woman. The ritual had been her idea, but it had proven useless. The woman, a member of the Paragon cult, lived there with a few other members, isolated from the world and living self-sufficiently. The forest was filled with miraculous recoveries from severe illnesses. The woman told Elanka that it wasn't the ritual that had failed, but that Elanka was too young and had used the wrong method. Elanka was skeptical, but unsure. She held Anya's most cherished dancing doll, its leg broken, just like Anya's disability. Among Anya's belongings, Elanka found her ex-boyfriend's phone number, but unfortunately, despite several attempts, she couldn't reach him. Once again, it was midnight, the time for everyone to gather and tell ghost stories. They all stared at Anya's ashes, unsure of what to do. Anya had been an interesting punk girl, and even her will was full of melodrama and dark humor. She had promised that if there was another world after death, she would do her best to let her fellow patients know so they wouldn't fear death. But until now, they had received no such message. It seems that when a person dies, it truly is the end. The so-called underworld was just a myth. Dr. Stanton interrupted the storytelling session. It turned out she had known about the Midnight Story Club all along. She understood that the young people were just seeking fun through telling stories, so she had always turned a blind eye. However, Elanka had gone too far by conducting some sort of cult sacrificial ritual. Dr. Stanton could no longer let them go on like this. From today onward, the Midnight Story Club had to be disbanded. But before that, Elanka wanted to hold a special funeral for Anya. So 7 terminally ill youths took their flashlights and went to the seaside. The night sea was cold and piercing, Anya's ashes scattered in the wind, and she would rest here forever. The simple funeral ended, and Kevin gave the grieving Elanka a big hug. Unexpectedly, Elanka, overcome with emotion, tried to kiss him. Kevin was startled by her juicy tongue because he had a girlfriend and was only offering a comforting hug using his muscles but not his tongue, not looking to take advantage. Hormone frustrated, Elanka wished she could jump into the sea to avoid the embarrassment. She had just scattered her friend's ashes and was already thinking about her own love life. Late that night, Dr. Stanton burned the evil diary. From now on, no one would be able to use its rituals to cause trouble. She cried as she hung Anya's photo on the wall. She couldn't remember how many patients had died at the nursing home. Elanka passed by the office and overheard Dr. Stanton, who was wiping away tears while on the phone. She told the person on the other end that the girl she liked had died. Anya's death had left her heartbroken. What drove her even crazier was that she had received a call from the doctor today saying that one of the remaining 7 patients had miraculously recovered. She didn't know if it was a misdiagnosis or if the ritual had worked. Elanka was shocked to hear that. She quietly returned to her room and stared at Anya's bed, her mind racing, thinking that the recovered young person might be herself. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked closely and saw the ghostly figure of the old woman. Why was this old ghost always haunting her? Terrified, Elanka hid in the bathroom, only to see the ghostly woman in the mirror. With enemies in front and behind, Elanka had nowhere to run. She blacked out and fainted on the spot. The scene shifts to Natsuki telling a story of her own. She walked into the garage and resolutely started the car. For some reason, she felt an irresistible urge to leave. A lonely girl driving an old, dilapidated car down a pitch-black road. The gas tank was full. This trip would take her far. Suddenly, a figure appeared ahead. Natsuki hurriedly hit the brakes. A punk woman knocked on the car window. It turned out to be a couple. The woman gently asked if they could hitch a ride. After much thought, Natsuki agreed. The man, dressed in black, unceremoniously took the passenger seat. The woman said they were rock musicians heading to a northern city for a gig. As she spoke, she lit a cigarette, and the car quickly filled with smoke. In truth, Natsuki didn't know where she was headed. She was just driving aimlessly. Along the roadside, she spotted a young man in a hoodie walking alone, head down, moving quickly with a gloomy expression on his face. The woman suggested that Natsuki stop the car and ask the young man if he needed help. The man, however, thought anyone traveling this late at night couldn't be up to any good and insisted that Natsuki keep driving. Oddly, since the couple had gotten into the car, the once full gas tank was now down to a quarter. The man kept urging Natsuki to stay focused and keep driving. The woman mentioned there was a gas station up ahead and suggested they stop to refuel. The gas station was deserted and the lights in the convenience store were off, though the open sign was still lit. The man volunteered to get out and check the situation, warning Natsuki to stay in the car because it was very cold outside. Once the man stepped out, the woman started talking. She warned that it was dangerous for a young, single woman to pick up strangers. Natsuki, indifferent, had long since stopped caring about life and death. The woman asked her what exactly she was running away from, and if there is really nothing here that she cares about. Suddenly, a disheveled man appeared, knocking on the window and cursing. He said he hadn't seen a soul and had no idea how he ended up there. Natsuki was confused, but the woman sighed and said there were many lost souls here and she must be very careful. Just then, the man returned to the car, saying there was no one in the store and they should try the next gas station. Natsuki started the engine again, glancing at the convenience store where she saw a strange woman looking at her sympathetically. She wondered why he said otherwise because there was someone there. The smoke in the car became so thick that Natsuki could barely open her eyes and the windows wouldn't roll down. The man, smoking, told her not to worry. Throughout the drive, the woman subtly suggested that Natsuki stop the car, but each time the man came up with an excuse to keep going. The man muttered something odd about how it must be very painful. Before Natsuki could react, she saw the young man in the hoodie again. His face, in just half an hour, had turned ghostly pale and terrifying. In her panic, Natsuki reached the second gas station. It had the same layout, the same convenience store. It seemed like they had come full circle. The man said all gas stations looked alike and told Natsuki not to overthink it. He warned her to stay in the car again while he checked things out, stressing the danger for a single woman to get out alone. After he left, the woman said this is her car and she doesn't have to listen to him. The smoke was unbearable. Encouraged by the woman, Natsuki finally turned off the engine and got out to breathe some fresh air. Just then, the man came running out of the store, shouting for them to get back in the car and leave. Natsuki quickly got back in and sped away. When she nervously asked what happened, the man nonchalantly said nothing much, and that he just killed the cashier and took all the change. Natsuki was horrified, realizing this guy was a deranged murderer. Then the man laughed and said, "He's just kidding." He then muttered again about how it must be very painful. Natsuki felt like she was trapped in a ghostly loop, endlessly driving in circles. For the third time, she saw the familiar hoodie. His face was bruised and purple, looking like a decaying zombie. Terrified, she slammed on the brakes. Suddenly, a little girl appeared in front of them, blocking their path. Natsuki wondered what a little girl was doing out here in the middle of nowhere. The woman urged Natsuki to get out and ask the girl what was going on, but the man stopped her again, claiming it was a new type of scam because the little girl was just bait, and there were probably several big robbers hiding nearby. If Natsuki got out, she would surely be killed. Natsuki looked at the helpless little girl. Her innocent face seemed familiar. Ignoring the man's warnings, she got out of the car. As she approached, the girl turned and ran. The woman, smiling reassuringly, followed Natsuki as they chased after the girl. They ended up back at the gas station for the third time. With the woman's guidance, Natsuki pushed through the thick smoke and reached a garage adorned with colorful lights. The man insisted they return to the car, but Natsuki opened the garage door. Inside was the red car she had been driving. She slowly approached and saw herself in the driver's seat, unconscious from gas inhalation. It turned out Natsuki had never left the garage. The woman said she was dying, and the man added it must be very painful. Actually, the woman and the man represented the angel and devil in Natsuki's subconscious. The man encouraged her to leave this world, while the woman urged her to stay, despite her difficult life. They took on Natsuki's form, symbolizing the internal struggle between hope and despair. The angel knew how hard Natsuki's journey had been, but reminded her that she was important and that there were many people who cared about her. Living was hard, but letting go seemed easier. Should she stay or go? After a moment of reflection, Natsuki opened the car door and woke up from her coma, just as the angel had said. She had never left the garage. Death wouldn't bring her peace. Instead, she would remain stuck in the same place. Natsuki struggled to open the garage door. Gentle sunlight bathed her face, and in that moment, she stepped out of her despair and embraced a new beginning. Natsuki's story ended there. It was her true story, a tale of a depression sufferer's fight between life and death. After that, Natsuki's depression gradually improved. She began to cherish life more and never thought of ending her own life again. But life played a cruel joke on her. In a follow-up medical checkup, Natsuki discovered she had cancer. She was still going to die, but this time it would be slower. Natsuki opened up to a fellow cancer patient, Amesh. Only after facing death did she understand the preciousness of life. This time, she truly wanted to live. Two lonely souls found each other that night. In the days that followed, they supported each other, determined to face whatever came their way together, no matter how hard or exhausting it might be. With the side story finished, the scene shifts back to Elanka, who had overheard a phone conversation between Dr. Stanton and a friend, learning that one of the 7 patients had been cured. Restless and desperate to know if she was the one, Elanka was startled by 2 ghostly apparitions, causing her to faint. When she woke up, it was already the next morning. Elanka went to Dr. Stanton's office, carefully asking who had been cured. Dr. Stanton was naturally angry about Elanka's eavesdropping because the hospital was still unsure if the news of the cure was reliable. She hoped Elanka would keep the secret to avoid giving everyone false hope. But Elanka had a big mouth. She immediately shared the secret with Kevin, who was suffering from leukemia. Kevin was equally shocked, but rationally thought the hospital might have made a mistake. Elanka, however, believed it must have been the sacrificial ritual they performed that night which cured one of them. To find answers, Elanka visited the mysterious woman near the sanatorium who had orchestrated the previous sacrificial ritual. Elanka was confused and desperate. Anya was already dead, and Amesh's heart condition was worsening. If the ritual had worked, it meant they all had a chance to live. Since the fall of the Paragon cult, the mysterious woman had moved with a few remaining followers to the woods, living a simple and peaceful life of farming. The cult members were like robots, working from dawn to dusk without interacting or even showing expressions. The woman believed that mysterious contact with nature could heal all diseases without medicine. She promised to help Elanka complete the remaining rituals, but only if she could see the cult's legendary diary. Understanding the cult's essence was crucial to helping Elanka and her friends. Time was running out. Natsuki and Amesh cherished their hard-won love. Spencer mustered the courage to return to the home that had abandoned him. His mother, a devout Christian, couldn't accept his sexuality or his HIV status. Spencer had moved out long ago, and his mother hadn't visited him once. His condition was worsening, and he knew he didn't have much time left. He just wanted to say a proper goodbye to his beloved mother. In tears, he delivered an emotional farewell speech, unsure if his mother even listened. You can't wake someone pretending to sleep. Perhaps Spencer's heartfelt words only moved himself. Midnight came again. Since the library was closed, the Midnight Story Club of 7 had to pause. Elanka couldn't sleep, still tormented by the question of who the cured patient was. She suddenly got up and took the elevator to the basement. The old elevator creaked, and the dark basement was the site of the cult's rituals years ago. Elanka turned on her flashlight and saw the old woman's ghostly figure standing in the hall. She was startled, but then noticed the old woman had a shadow, suggesting she wasn't a ghost. Gathering her courage, Elanka approached and shouted at her to tell her what she wanted. She pushed the woman's heavy body, only to discover it was Kevin, who was bewildered, wondering if he had been sleepwalking. The scene shifts to another story session held by Spencer. In the story, the boy, Rel, was a transfer student with rugged looks and a strong build, which made him quite popular among the naive girls. However, he had no interest in them because he liked men only. In his spare time, Rel would always find opportunities to sneak glances at the adorably clueless Christopher. Christopher was a mechanical genius, always tinkering with electronic components. To create a chance to be alone with Christopher, Rel bought a camcorder. Knowing that Christopher loved sci-fi movies from Daniel C.C. Movie Channel, Rel would record the late-night movies airing at 3 a.m. One night, Rel had a strange dream where he found himself lying on a cold lab table with someone implanting intricate electronic parts into his body. He woke up with a start, thinking it was just a result of watching too many sci-fi movies. The next morning, Rel tried to strike up a conversation with Christopher, who was a perfectionist and couldn't tolerate any flaws. Christopher was about to discard a newly assembled machine to start over. Despite being a stranger, Rel quickly bonded with the socially awkward science nerd. Rel told Christopher he had recorded last night's HBO broadcast of Terminator and invited him to his dorm to watch it. Excited to finally have someone to talk to, Christopher couldn't refuse. The two big guys prepared snacks and beers, making the movie night feel more like a date. However, when Rel played the tape, it was the morning news, with the anchor reporting on a sports event where the Seagulls had scored 20 points and pulled off a major upset. Rel was sure he had set the recorder for the movie before going to bed and wondered if he had recorded the wrong channel. With no movie to watch, Christopher suggested they go to a bar to play pool and catch a game. Coincidentally, the bar TV was airing the Seagulls match. Thinking it was a replay, they were surprised when a guy at the bar said it was live. Confused, Rel remembered the broadcast from the tape and decided to place a bet based on the results he had seen. The Seagulls scored 20 points and won, just as on the tape, and Rel won the bet. Back at the dorm, they replayed the tape and noticed the timestamp showed the next day. It turned out the camcorder could record events from the future. Over the next few days, Rel and Christopher would record games at 3 a.m. and bet on the outcomes, quickly amassing over 1,000 in just a week. Their collaboration brought them closer, and they eventually became a couple. One morning, Christopher habitually played the previous night's recording. It showed a girl on campus having a tragic accident, being crushed by a falling air conditioner at 10:15 a.m. just 4 minutes away. Without wasting any time, Rel dashed to the school building. Sure enough, the air conditioner on the 3rd floor was starting to loosen. Rel lunged to save the girl, successfully altering the future, and both were unharmed. Christopher breathed a sigh of relief for Rel. At that moment, Christopher noticed a figure wrapped tightly in the crowd, looking very eerie. They realized that tampering with the timeline would bring repercussions. Understanding they couldn't continue their antics, Christopher suggested they take a break, giving himself a few days to visit his lonely mother. Rel agreed, but the curiosity was too strong. As soon as Christopher left, Rel set the camcorder to record again. That night, Rel had another cyberpunk mechanical dream. The first thing he did when he woke up was to play back the recording from the previous night. The news anchor reported a tragic crime. Christopher, a local university student, had been found dead at his mother's house. Christopher's mother told the police that a burglar had smashed the window in the early hours and released toxic gas, causing both of them to pass out. Terrified, Rel rushed to Christopher's place overnight. Seeing Christopher safe and sound, Rel finally breathed a sigh of relief. But then the assailant arrived, throwing a mechanical ball into the house. Purple gas quickly filled the room, knocking out Christopher and his mother before they could react. Strangely, Rel was unaffected. The intruder tried to break in, and Rel hid in a corner in fear. A heavily wrapped figure entered. Without hesitation, Rel struck the intruder hard. Despite his fear, Rel's strength quickly overpowered the assailant. Pulling back the intruder's hood, Rel was shocked to find that the attacker looked exactly like Christopher. It turned out that this was Christopher from 40 years in the future. The man claimed he wasn't there to kill Christopher, but to protect him. He revealed that the real threat was Rel himself. He urged Rel to recall his birthplace, his high school, his parents' names, but Rel couldn't remember any of it. Just then, it dawned on him that Rel was also from the future, a robot created by Christopher. Rel was different from other robots. He had human emotions and fears, which Christopher saw as flaws. When Christopher tried to destroy him, Rel escaped back to the past using a time machine. Rel couldn't believe it. He picked up a blunt object and struck future Christopher, only to discover that Christopher was also a robot. Christopher had fallen ill shortly after, replacing his organic parts with mechanical ones to survive, eventually becoming a full robot. Time travel had destroyed Rel's memory, but his abilities still affected the camcorder, recording fragments of his memory. These recordings were both Rel's past and the future of this era. According to the timeline, Rel would regain his memories tonight and would kill past Christopher to prevent future Christopher from crossing over. Filled with terror, Rel realized he would inevitably kill his lover to save himself. To protect Christopher, Rel decided to let Christopher kill him instead. When Christopher woke up from his stupor, both Rel and the future Christopher were gone, leaving behind a single videotape. It contained Rel's memories. Future Christopher, in an attempt to eliminate painful emotions, had removed his own humanity and sought to eradicate everyone else's emotions too. Imagine a world where one can't love, cry, or laugh. How dark and dull life would be. In the video, Rel hoped his death would change Christopher's mind. Because heartfelt words, Rel altered the past and the fate of all humanity. Spencer's story ended there. In reality, Rel and Christopher symbolized Spencer and his ex-boyfriend. Spencer had contracted HIV from his ex, just as the story Christopher had unintentionally killed Rel. Despite his life nearing its end, Spencer never blamed his boyfriend. He hoped society would accept his boyfriend just as he wished everyone would accept him and everyone present. As Spencer finished his story, Sandra was in tears. It turned out that all 7 friends were battling cancer. Everyone was fighting their own demons except Sandra, the one who had miraculously recovered. But the hospital explained it as a misdiagnosis. As a result, Sandra was about to leave the sanatorium, and Elanka felt a pang of bitterness, almost driven mad with jealousy. Late at night, Kevin had a nightmare. In his dream, the same old man with white hair appeared, saying he found her. It turns out, since Kevin and Elanka moved into this sanatorium, they had often seen an old woman with white hair and, out of nowhere, an old man appearing in mirrors. Initially, they thought these were just hallucinations caused by their medication, but if they were just hallucinations, why could both of them see the same apparitions? There was only one explanation. The sanatorium was genuinely haunted. They gathered their 5 fellow patients and asked around. Only Kevin and Elanka could see the old man and woman. The others explained that this phenomenon had a technical term called shared psychosis, where 2 close individuals share the same delusion. Everyone at the sanatorium, despite being in the prime of their lives, was diagnosed with terminal illnesses. The sanatorium, ostensibly for treatment, was more like a nursing home club. No one had any hope of surviving except Elanka, who refused to give up. Desperate to live, she tried anything, even believing in occult sacrificial rituals to cure herself. Unfortunately, she didn't get better, but Sandra was about to leave and start a new life. Sandra apologized to everyone, revealing that the call Spencer heard outside the ward was just her prank. She wanted everyone to think she could become a ghost after death and continue to exist in another world. Jealousy, disappointment, and sadness twisted Elanka's face. At that moment, Kevin's girlfriend appeared. Despite Kevin's leukemia, his girlfriend had stayed by his side, visiting him regularly. Elanka, who also liked Kevin, lashed out at his girlfriend, venting her envy of her health and their relationship. The girlfriend stood there, stunned and clueless. Elanka then sought out the mysterious woman in the countryside. The ritual hadn't worked, and Elanka felt deeply ashamed. But the woman insisted that the sacrificial ritual was effective, claiming she was a beneficiary of it. The woman turned out to be Julia, the miracle girl who had recovered over 20 years ago. After disappearing from the sanatorium for a while, her tumors vanished. Elanka had read about Julia's story online, which motivated her to move to the sanatorium. Julia was Elanka's beacon of hope. Nothing was more convincing than a first-hand account from someone who had benefited from the ritual. Julia proposed performing the ritual herself that night at the sanatorium, promising a cure. After everyone fell asleep, Elanka quietly let Julia and her 3 followers in. They took the old elevator to the basement. Julia claimed to feel an immense power in the air. She arranged Elanka and her followers in a circle, sitting in the center, and prepared 4 cups of sacrificial tea. She then instructed them to cut their fingers and mark her forehead with their diabetic blood. However, Elanka felt something was off. This ritual didn't match what she had read. Julia reassured her, saying she was the expert and they should follow her lead. Chanting, Julia cut her palm and let her blood drip into the tea. The final step of the ritual was to drink the tea. Elanka hesitated, but Julia, unusually aggressive, urged her to drink. Just then, Dr. Stanton burst in, desperately trying to stop Elanka from drinking the tea. Confused, Elanka was about to drink when she saw the 3 followers who had already drunk the tea writhing in pain on the floor. Julia lunged at Elanka in desperation. Julia's true nature was fully exposed. She had exploited Elanka's will to live, deceiving her into participating in the sacrificial ritual and intending to make her a sacrificial victim. At the critical moment, Dr. Stanton intervened and subdued Julia, saving Elanka's life. The scene shifts back to Kevin and his unfinished story of the serial killer Dusty, who set his sights on a young woman late at night. Every time he raised his hammer, the spirits of those he had killed gathered around the bed, silently screaming at him. Dusty ignored their chicken cries and ended the girl's chicken life with a single blow. Then came the grim task of packing up the body and cleaning up the scene, but he hadn't counted on the girl's younger brother being at home. To silence him, Dusty had to deliver another hammer blow. Dusty was already bloodthirsty, but killing wasn't his intent. Since his father passed away, his single mother had become senile due to a stroke. In his spare time, he often shared his day at school with his mother. She couldn't speak, but was a great listener. Yet this seemingly harmless woman would creep into Dusty's room every night, uttering eerie calls. She would call out the names of girls, compelling him to kill young women as sacrifices to her. Dusty was tormented by his mother's strange calls and could only follow her orders, killing 2 young girls every few days without hormone mercy and burying their bodies in the countryside. After each murder, he would leave a sand glass totem, also at his mother's behest, as a family mark. Dusty was very lonely, going to school alone and not daring to get close to anyone, until his classmate, Sheila, entered his life and became his girlfriend. Aside from being a murderer, Dusty was gentle and likable. He constantly worried about whether to continue the relationship. What if he went mad one day and killed Sheila too? As fate would have it, one night, Dusty had just fallen asleep like a pig when he opened his eyes to see his mother's menacing face. She grabbed his piggy throat, chanting Sheila's name, commanding him to sacrifice his girlfriend. Torn between his mother's calls and the spirit's screams, Dusty felt paralyzed. He stumbled out of bed, trembling, and called Sheila, making up an excuse to invite her over. The spirits of his victims stood behind him, their mouths wide open, ready for smelly turds, agonizing chicken screams. After some time, Sheila arrived at Dusty's house, calling out his name but getting no response. She noticed family photos on the wall, including his mother, grandparents, and great-grandparents. She saw that his great-grandfather's necklace bore a sandglass totem, identical to the one found at the crime scenes. Unbeknownst to Sheila, Dusty had killed her best friend not long ago, and she had been dating the murderer, blissfully unaware. Dusty coldly confessed to Sheila that the true killers were his grandfather, his mother, and himself. But in the end, he couldn't bring himself to harm her. He fought off the mysterious force and firmly told his mother he would never, ever hurt Sheila. At that moment, his mother transformed into a terrifying demon, crawling on the walls like a spider pig. Since her son wouldn't do it, she would have to kill Sheila herself. Dusty and his mother clashed. Sheila grabbed a hammer and struck her future mother-in-law's head. Blood stained the carpet, and in her final moments, his mother regained her sanity, gently saying goodbye to her son. Like Dusty, she had been controlled by a demon, killing against her will. With the demon's death, the spirits of Dusty's victims ascended to heaven one by one. Dusty then recounted his family's history. At some point, his once kind grandfather became a murderer, killing for a lifetime. When he grew too old to wield the hammer, the demon possessed his mother to kill. However, when she became paralyzed by a stroke, the demon began controlling Dusty. The worst part was that he knew what he was doing but had no choice. Suddenly, his mother's body convulsed, and a green smoke emerged from her mouth and nose, entering Dusty's body. This suggested that the demon hadn't disappeared, and the family curse continued. Dusty picked up the hammer. Such a young, strong body was irresistible to the demon. His gaze on Sheila was cold and detached. The demon sneered that Dusty is dead, but even as he raised the hammer, he couldn't bring it down on her. Instead, he struck his own chest heavily. He handed the hammer to Sheila, using his remaining sanity to beg her to kill him and end the century-old curse. In the next scene, Dusty is now living in a high-security psychiatric hospital. In the end, Sheila couldn't bring herself to kill him. No one believed in the bizarre story of demonic possession. Ultimately, the prosecutor declared Dusty not guilty due to insanity. However, he would spend the rest of his life in the psychiatric hospital. The police discovered many bodies in the cave where he buried his victims, some of which had died long before his grandfather was born. For Dusty, none of this mattered anymore. So long as Sheila was alive, he was content. He could no longer harm anyone. Yet the demon's calls still echoed relentlessly in his waxy ears. Dusty found some solace only in bursts of loud music. Kevin's story had come to an end. Though it was a work of fiction, the protagonist was a reflection of himself. Since being diagnosed with leukemia, Kevin had become very withdrawn. He knew he didn't have long to live. Despite having many admirers, Kevin could only bear to reject them, knowing that a dying man would only bring heartbreak and waste their youth. Elanka also joined tonight's storytelling session. After Dr. Stanton saved her from the cultist Julia, Dr. Stanton let the deceitful Julia go and performed CPR on 3 other followers who had been poisoned. Thanks to the timely intervention, the 3 followers were fine after having their stomachs pumped. Dr. Stanton then recounted Julia's story. In 1968, Julia was just 17 years old and had been admitted to the sanatorium due to cancer. She accidentally came across the diary of the Paragon cult and learned about the evil sacrificial ritual that could save her life. She secretly left the sanatorium and found the cult leader, Aceso. Julia stayed at Aceso's home for a while, and when she returned to the sanatorium, her cancer was miraculously cured. This extraordinary experience turned into an unspeakable urban legend, attracting Elanka to the sanatorium. Dr. Stanton explained that regardless of how Julia cured herself back then, it wasn't a lasting solution. Julia fell ill again, and this time it was so severe that she needed to sacrifice 4 lives to save herself. Elanka was nearly one of those sacrifices. Now that the 4 potential victims were safe, it was clear that Julia wouldn't give up easily. What Elanka had hoped would be a cure for her cancer turned out to be useless, leaving her in despair. She and her friends had to face the reality of dying young. Amesh's heart condition was worsening, his vision blurring, and he could barely hold on to things. It seemed he might leave them soon. Due to a misdiagnosis by the hospital, Sandra became the only lucky one among the 8 wardmates. She was about to leave the sanatorium and start a new life. Everyone was happy for her, offering hugs and blessings, including Elanka. After this ordeal, Elanka finally came to terms with death. Watching Sandra walk away, everyone felt a mix of envy and sadness. On the next visiting day, Amesh's parents, who had been deported, finally sorted out their visa issues. They promised to come to the US soon to see him for the last time. The parents all adored his new girlfriend, Natsuki. No matter how hard the future might be, these 2 youths with terminal illnesses would find comfort in each other's company and face it together. Spencer's mother also finally came to terms with everything and visited him in the sanatorium for the first time. She came to see her son, who was living with AIDS, knowing he was just a victim. Anya's ex-boyfriend saw her obituary in the newspaper and came to the sanatorium to collect her belongings. Anya was an orphan, and Elanka had personally taken care of her funeral arrangements. Elanka told him that despite some regrets, Anya passed away peacefully, surrounded by friends. The ex-boyfriend was surprised to find that Anya's broken-legged doll had been repaired. Elanka was even more surprised. She distinctly remembered the doll having only 1 leg, but now it was completely intact with no sign of damage. Before she died, Anya had promised her friends that if she did go to the afterlife, she would find a way to show them that another world exists, that death isn't the end but another beginning. It seems she kept her promise through the repaired doll. Elanka no longer feared death, even writing her own eulogy in advance. Kevin finally mustered the courage to break up with his devoted girlfriend. She was healthy, lively, and full of life, and he didn't want her to waste her youth on someone who was dying. He also didn't want to pretend to be healthy just to make her happy, accompanying her to various social events, which only exhausted them both. Though his girlfriend had expected this moment, it was still painful. But eventually, paths diverge, and they parted as friends, hoping to meet again someday. Out of the 8 terminally ill young people, 1 had died, and 1 had recovered, leaving 6 of them struggling on. They gathered together to share a beautiful story about the afterlife, a place where they'd be reunited with their departed loved ones. Their faces were lit with smiles as they imagined dancing with fireflies and reaching the shores of their dreams in another world. Today's storytelling session ended perfectly. Kevin suddenly called out to Elanka. After spending so much time together, he couldn't keep lying to himself. He liked Elanka, and he believed she felt the same. Life or death, it didn't matter. They had found love and friendship along this journey. No matter where or when, they would never be alone, and that was what mattered most. Another day came to an end. Dr. Stanton carefully checked the doors and windows, ensuring that the wicked Julia wouldn't return. She glanced at the photo wall where pictures of the sanatorium's founders were displayed. The photos revealed that the ghostly old man and woman who had been appearing were the sanatorium's founders. But why they were haunting Elanka remained unanswered. The effectiveness of the sacrificial ritual, the fate of the 6 remaining friends, and the whereabouts of the evil Julia were all left unresolved. To the sound of gentle classical music, Dr. Stanton removed her wig, revealing a bald head. On the back of her neck was a tattoo of a sandglass, which indicates that Dr. Stanton is actually the biological daughter of the cult leader Acesso and the owner of that diary. She scoffed at the cult's sacrificial rituals and betrayed them years ago, sending her own mother to prison. With that, the drama comes to an end.